The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the low hum of universal translators working overtime. Representatives from dozens of species filled the tiered seats, their varied forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. At the center of it all sat the most unlikely delegate anyone had ever seen, a human child who barely reached the knee of the smallest adult present. Marcus Chen was 12 years old, though his age meant nothing to the alien dignitaries surrounding him. To them, he was simply the smallest, most fragile-looking creature they had ever encountered in a formal diplomatic setting. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he hunched over a tablet, completely absorbed in his work, while conversations swirled around him in languages that sounded like music, grinding metal, and everything in between. The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall being with crystal-like skin that reflected the chamber's lights, leaned toward his aide. "Why exactly is this tiny human here? Surely Earth has more suitable representatives for such important matters." His aide, equally crystalline but smaller, whispered back, "The humans claim he is their finest linguist, something about understanding patterns others cannot see." Both Zephyrians made a sound that their translators rendered as laughter, though it came out like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The notion that such a small, young creature could contribute anything meaningful to their discussions seemed absurd. Marcus looked up from his tablet, his brown eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made several delegates uncomfortable. He had been listening to every conversation, every whispered comment, every casual dismissal. His fingers moved across the tablet's surface, recording not just words, but tonal patterns, gesture timing, and the subtle ways different species communicated beyond mere language. "The Carathian representative seems agitated," Marcus said quietly to Ambassador Sarah Chen, his mother, who sat beside him in the human delegation area. Sarah glanced at the reptilian being in question, noting the way his scales had shifted from deep green to a mottled yellow-brown. "How can you tell? The translator isn't picking up anything unusual in his speech." "His scale color change follows a mathematical pattern. Every time someone mentions the Nexus territories, the yellowing intensifies by approximately 15%. The pattern suggests deep emotional distress, not just political disagreement." Marcus made another note on his tablet. "Also, he keeps touching his throat with his secondary arms. That's not random fidgeting. It's following a rhythm, almost like he's trying to self-soothe." Before Sarah could respond, the chamber's attention was drawn to the massive doors at the far end. They groaned open to reveal a delegation that made even the largest aliens present seem small. The Kathrani had arrived. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Standing 3 meters tall, the Kathrani resembled a cross between the great cats of Earth and the dragons of human mythology. Their fur ranged from deep midnight black to silver that seemed to capture and hold starlight. Powerful muscles rippled beneath their coats as they moved with a predator's grace. Their eyes, large and intelligent, surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of apex hunters. But it was the creatures that followed them that truly captured everyone's attention. The Sorok were unlike anything in the known galaxy. They moved on 6 legs, each ending in retractable claws that could tear through starship hulls. Their bodies were covered in scales that shifted color constantly, creating mesmerizing patterns that seemed to hypnotize anyone who looked too long. Most unsettling of all, they seemed to communicate entirely without sound. No vocalizations that any universal translator could detect, no gesture language that xenolinguists had been able to decode. The lead Kathrani, whose fur was so black it seemed to absorb light, strode to the center of the chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried the rumbling power of an earthquake. "I am Prime Hunter Vorthak of the Kathrani Alliance. We come seeking aid in a matter of utmost importance to not just our species, but potentially all intelligent life in this galaxy." The chamber fell silent. The Kathrani were known as fierce warriors and skilled hunters, but they rarely involved themselves in galactic politics. For them to request aid was unprecedented. "Speak, Prime Hunter," said the Galactic Council's chairwoman, a ethereal being whose species had transcended physical form centuries ago. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Vorthak's massive form seemed to diminish slightly, a subtle sign of vulnerability that few present noticed. "Our Sauroch companions are dying. For millennia they have been our partners, our guides through the complexities of space and time. They possess knowledge that predates most civilizations in this galaxy. But something is affecting them. A plague, a curse. We do not know. They grow weaker each day, and they cannot tell us what afflicts them." He gestured toward the Sauroch, who had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the chamber's perimeter. Their scales continued their constant color shifts, but Marcus noticed something others did not. There was a pattern to the changes, a rhythm that seemed almost desperate. "We have consulted with the finest minds in the galaxy," Vorthak continued. "The Zephyrian crystal seers, the quantum architects of Nexus Prime, the hive mind analysts of the collective. None can decipher their communication method. Without understanding what they are trying to tell us, we cannot help them. And if they die—" His voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. The Sauroch were more than just companions to the Kathrani. They were living libraries, repositories of ancient knowledge that included star charts to unknown regions, the locations of long-lost civilizations, and secrets of technologies that could benefit everyone. Their death would be an incalculable loss. "Perhaps," suggested the Zephyrian ambassador, with a tone that dripped condescension, "the humans could assist. After all, they claim to have brought their finest linguistic expert." His gaze fell on Marcus, and what might have been amusement rippled through his crystalline form. Several other delegates made sounds that the universal translators interpreted as various forms of laughter. The idea that a human child could succeed where the galaxy's greatest minds had failed was beyond absurd to them. Marcus felt his mother's hand touch his shoulder in a gesture of support, but his attention was entirely focused on the Sauroch. While everyone else saw random, meaningless color changes, Marcus was beginning to see something else entirely. His mind, which had been absorbing and analyzing patterns since he was old enough to hold a toy, was working on a level that even he didn't fully understand. "The color changes aren't random," he whispered to his mother, his eyes never leaving the alien creatures. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice equally low. "They're mathematical. Not just mathematical. They're prime numbers. Look." Marcus held up his tablet, which now displayed a complex graph. "The red shifts occur every 2, 3, 5, 7, 11 seconds. The blue shifts follow the next sequence, 13, 17, 19, 23. They're counting in prime numbers, but why?" Prime Hunter Vorthak was explaining the various failed attempts to communicate with the Sauroch when Marcus stood up. His small form in the vast chamber should have been invisible, but something about his movement caught attention. Perhaps it was the intense focus radiating from him, or the way he seemed completely unaware of the hundreds of eyes turning toward him. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his young voice somehow carrying clearly through the chamber. "Prime Hunter Vorthak, may I approach your companions?" The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds: laughter, outrage, bewilderment. The idea that a human child would interrupt a formal session was shocking enough, but to request direct contact with the mysterious Sauroch was unprecedented. Vorthak's large eyes fixed on Marcus, and for a moment, the predator in him was clearly visible. Then, something shifted in his expression. Perhaps it was the complete lack of fear in the boy's demeanor, or the way Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "You are very small, young human," Vorthak said, his voice gentler than before. "Why do you believe you can succeed where others have failed?" Marcus walked down the steps toward the center of the chamber, his tablet clutched in his hands. Every step was watched by dozens of species, many of whom were taking bets on how quickly the child would give up or run away in terror. Because, Marcus said simply, I don't think they're trying to communicate with words or gestures. I think they're communicating with mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care how big or small you are. It just is. The chamber fell silent as Marcus approached the nearest Sauroch. The creature was beautiful in an alien way, its scales shifting through deep purples and golds. Up close, Marcus could see that its 6 eyes, 2 large primary ones and 4 smaller secondary ones, were all focused on him with an intelligence that was unmistakably ancient and profound. Marcus sat down cross-legged in front of the creature, placing his tablet on the floor between them. "Hello," he said softly. "I'm Marcus. I think you've been trying to tell everyone something very important, but they haven't been listening the right way. May I try?" The Sauroch's scales suddenly stopped their constant shifting. For the first time since entering the chamber, its coloration became completely still. Its primary eyes blinked once, slowly, and then the most remarkable thing happened. Its scales began to shift in a completely new pattern. Instead of the seemingly random rainbow of colors, they now displayed simple patterns. A single red dot, then 2 red dots, then 3, then 5, then 7. Prime numbers, just as Marcus had suspected. Marcus felt his heart racing with excitement. "You are counting! You're showing me prime numbers!" He quickly input the sequence into his tablet. But why prime numbers? What makes them special to you? The Sauroch's scales shifted again. This time, the pattern was more complex. Groups of colors appeared and disappeared in what looked like mathematical equations. Marcus's fingers flew over his tablet, recording everything while his mind raced to understand. "The prime numbers are just the beginning," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "You're showing me something about the fundamental structure of something. But what?" Around the chamber, the various delegates watched in stunned silence. Even the most skeptical among them had to admit that something unprecedented was happening. The Sauroch, which had never responded to any form of communication attempt, was clearly interacting with the human child. Prime Hunter Vorthak moved closer, his massive form casting a shadow over Marcus and the Sauroch. "What is happening, young human? What are they telling you?" Marcus looked up, his eyes bright with excitement and concentration. "I'm not sure yet, but they're definitely trying to communicate something mathematical, something complex. I need more time to understand the full pattern, but this is definitely a language. It's just not like any language we've ever encountered before." He turned back to the Sauroch, whose scales had now begun displaying what looked like star charts, constellations of points connected by lines that appeared and disappeared in precise timing. "Are you showing me locations? Places in space?" The Sauroch's response was immediate and dramatic. Its scales blazed with a brilliant white light that filled the entire chamber, then faded to show a complex 3-dimensional map that seemed to hang in the air above its body. The map showed star systems, but not just any star systems. These were arrangements that Marcus recognized from his studies of galactic cartography. "That's the Nexus territories," breathed the Carathian delegate, his scales now a pure, shocked white. "But how could they know about classified star charts?" Marcus felt pieces of a vast puzzle beginning to click together in his mind. The Sauroch weren't just trying to communicate. They were trying to warn everyone about something. Something connected to the Nexus territories, something that related to their mysterious illness, and something that would require mathematical precision to understand. As the session continued, Marcus remained focused on the Sauroch, completely absorbed in trying to decode their complex mathematical language. He was unaware that his breakthrough was being watched by intelligence networks across the galaxy, or that there were those who would prefer that the Sauroch's message never be fully understood. The first day of what would become the most important communication effort in galactic history was ending. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The Sauroch had so much more to tell them, and he was determined to learn their mathematical language before it was too late. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber for the day, Marcus remained seated on the floor with the Sauroch, his tablet now filled with mathematical sequences that would take hours to fully analyze. The creature's scales had returned to their gentle shifting pattern, but now Marcus could see it wasn't random at all. It was a complex mathematical symphony, and he was finally beginning to hear the music. Marcus had barely slept in the 3 days since his first contact with the Sauroch. His small quarters in the diplomatic wing of the station had been transformed into something resembling a mathematical laboratory. Equations covered every available surface. Holographic displays showed rotating star charts, and his tablet had been supplemented with 3 additional processing units that hummed constantly as they worked through the vast amounts of data he was collecting. His mother, Sarah, watched him with growing concern as he hunched over his latest calculations, dark circles under his eyes, testament to his obsession with cracking the Sauroch's mathematical language. "Marcus, you need to eat something. And sleep. You can't solve this if you collapse from exhaustion." "I'm close, Mom. Really close." Marcus didn't look up from his work. The prime number sequences weren't just counting. They were establishing a mathematical foundation, like teaching me their number system before moving on to more complex concepts. "Look at this." He gestured to a holographic display that showed the star map the Sauroch had projected, but now overlaid with mathematical annotations. "These aren't just star positions. They're showing me gravitational relationships, orbital mechanics, but calculated to a precision that shouldn't be possible without quantum computers. How do they process mathematics at this level in their minds?" Before Sarah could answer, there was a soft chime at their door. Marcus finally looked up to see Prime Hunter Vorthak filling the doorway, having to duck significantly to fit through the human-sized entrance. Behind him stood 2 other Kathrani that Marcus hadn't seen before, one with silver fur marked with deep blue stripes, and another whose golden coat seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "Young human," Vorthak rumbled, his voice carefully modulated to avoid overwhelming the small space. "May we enter? There are matters we must discuss." Marcus nodded eagerly, clearing space on the cluttered floor. The 3 Kathrani managed to arrange themselves in the room, though they had to remain crouched to avoid hitting the ceiling. "These are Battle Sister Zyra," Vorthak indicated the silver and blue Kathrani, "and Lore Keeper Theron." The golden Kathrani inclined his massive head in greeting. "They have knowledge that may aid your efforts." Zyra spoke first, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to command. 3 more Sauroch communities have gone silent in the past rotation. Whatever afflicts them is spreading faster than we initially believed. Time grows short. Lore Keeper Theron's voice was different from the others. Older. Weighted with the burden of ancient knowledge. "Young human, what I am about to tell you has been kept secret for over 1,000 years. The Sauroch are not merely our companions. They are the living memory of our species and many others. When a Sauroch bonds with an individual, they share that being's memories, experiences, and knowledge. When that individual dies, the Sauroch preserves everything." Marcus felt his mind reeling. "They're living databases? Biological storage systems for entire civilizations' worth of knowledge?" "More than that," Theron continued. "They can access and cross-reference information across multiple species, multiple time periods. A single Sauroch may carry the memories of thousands of individuals from dozens of different worlds. They see patterns and connections that would take our greatest minds lifetimes to discover." "That explains the mathematical complexity," Marcus breathed, pieces falling into place. "They're not just communicating in mathematics. They're trying to show us mathematical relationships that span multiple civilizations, multiple ways of understanding reality. Zyra leaned forward, her predator's instincts clearly engaged. But something is blocking them from accessing these memories. They grow weaker as they struggle to maintain connections to knowledge networks that span the galaxy. If they die, centuries of accumulated wisdom dies with them. Marcus turned back to his calculations with renewed urgency. Then we need to understand what they're trying to tell us about the Nexus territories. Every time they show me those star charts, the mathematical intensity increases. Something there is connected to their condition. He called up his latest analysis on the holographic display. Look at this. The orbital mechanics they're showing me aren't current positions of stars and planets. They're predictions, calculations showing where these celestial bodies will be at specific times in the future. But the calculations assume gravitational influences that don't exist in our current models. Theron's eyes widened, a reaction that was dramatic on his massive feline features. Show me those calculations again. Marcus expanded the display, showing the complex gravitational models the Sauroch had been communicating through their scale patterns. According to their mathematics, there should be a massive gravitational source in the center of the Nexus territories. But our surveys show empty space. Not empty space, Theron whispered, his voice filled with what could only be described as dread. Hidden space. Young human, you have uncovered something that was buried for good reason. Before anyone could ask what he meant, Marcus's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. The holographic display shifted to show the Galactic Council's emergency session symbol. All delegates to the main chamber immediately, came the announcement. Priority Alpha situation developing. The four of them made their way quickly through the station corridors, Marcus having to run to keep up with the Kathrani's long strides. When they arrived at the council chamber, they found it in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species were talking urgently among themselves, and the massive viewing screen at the front of the chamber showed what appeared to be sensor readings from the Nexus territories. The council chairwoman's ethereal voice cut through the noise. Order! We have received disturbing reports from our monitoring stations in the Nexus region. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures where none should exist. Additionally, several survey ships have reported instrument malfunctions and crew members experiencing what can only be described as shared hallucinations. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Shared hallucinations? What kind of hallucinations? Visual and auditory experiences of events from other times and places, the chairwoman continued. Crew members reporting memories that are not their own, knowledge of languages they never learned, understanding of technologies they have never encountered. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs, but Marcus was no longer listening. His mind was racing as connections formed with startling clarity. The Sauroch's memory network, he whispered to Vorthak. Whatever is in the Nexus territories is interfering with their ability to control and maintain their biological storage systems. Vorthak's eyes narrowed. Explain. Marcus pulled out his tablet, calling up his analysis. The gravitational anomalies they're calculating, the future position predictions, they're trying to warn us about something that's going to happen in the Nexus territories. Something that will affect their memory networks on a galactic scale. He turned to address the chamber, his young voice somehow carrying clearly over the chaos. Honored delegates, I believe the Sauroch are trying to warn us about a cascade failure in their species' memory network. The symptoms your survey crews are experiencing, shared memories, knowledge they shouldn't have, those are the same things the Sauroch are supposed to be able to control and maintain. The Zephyrian ambassador, who had been among Marcus's most vocal critics, stood up. You expect us to believe that a child has decoded a mystery that has stumped our greatest minds? That alien creatures are experiencing some form of memory overflow? Before Marcus could respond, every screen in the chamber suddenly flickered and changed. Instead of sensor readouts and official displays, they now showed something impossible: scenes from various planets and civilizations playing simultaneously. Marcus recognized some from his studies of galactic history, but others showed technologies and beings he had never seen. "It's happening here too," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with awe and terror. "Whatever is affecting the Nexus territories is spreading. The Saurochs' memory networks are destabilizing across the galaxy." The implications hit the chamber like a physical wave. If the Saurochs stored the memories and knowledge of countless civilizations, and that network was breaking down, the results would be catastrophic. Thousands of years of accumulated wisdom could be lost forever. Worse, if the memories began flooding uncontrollably into other minds, the psychological impact on billions of beings could be devastating. Lore Keeper Theron stood, his massive form commanding attention. The young human speaks truth. There are ancient protocols among the Sauroch for preventing exactly this scenario, but those protocols require precise mathematical calculations to implement. Calculations that must be performed in their mathematical language. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "You're saying I need to not just understand what they're trying to tell us, but learn to communicate back to them in their mathematical language." "More than that," Theron replied gravely. "You need to help them perform calculations that will stabilize their memory networks before the cascade failure reaches the point of no return." The chamber fell silent as the magnitude of the situation became clear. A 12-year-old human child had become the galaxy's only hope of preventing the loss of countless civilizations' worth of knowledge and the potential psychological destruction of billions of minds. Marcus looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates, many of whom had dismissed him just days before. Now they were looking at him with expressions ranging from hope to desperation to barely contained panic. "I need direct access to the Sauroch," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Not just observation. I need to be able to work with them directly, and I need the fastest quantum computers you have available. If we're going to solve calculations that span galactic distances and multiple civilizations' mathematical systems, I'm going to need all the processing power you can give me." Prime Hunter Vorthak placed a massive hand on Marcus's shoulder, the gesture both protective and encouraging. "You shall have whatever you need, young human. The fate of knowledge itself may rest in your small hands." As the emergency session continued around him, Marcus found himself thinking about the responsibility that had been placed upon him. He was just one small human in a galaxy full of ancient, powerful civilizations. But somehow, his unique ability to see mathematical patterns where others saw chaos had made him the key to preventing a disaster of unimaginable proportions. The screens around the chamber continued to flicker with random memories from across the galaxy, a constant reminder that time was running out. Marcus straightened his shoulders and prepared to attempt something that no being in galactic history had ever done before: have a mathematical conversation with alien minds that thought in equations spanning space and time. The real work was about to begin, and Marcus knew that success or failure would determine not just the fate of the Sauroch, but the preserved wisdom of countless civilizations throughout the galaxy. The Emergency Command Center had been established in the station's largest cargo bay, hastily converted to accommodate both the massive quantum computing arrays and the Sauroch who had been brought from across the galaxy. Marcus sat in the center of it all, surrounded by holographic displays that showed mathematical equations floating in three-dimensional space around him like a complex constellation of numbers and symbols. 47 Sauroch had been gathered, representing nearly a quarter of their surviving population. They formed a perfect circle around Marcus, their scales shifting in synchronized patterns that created waves of color rippling through the assembled group. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. Billions of years of accumulated knowledge made manifest in living mathematics. The cascade failure is accelerating, reported Dr. Venna Koss, the quantum architect from Nexus Prime, who had been assigned to assist Marcus. Her species existed partially outside normal space-time, allowing them to process information at near-light speeds. Even she was struggling to keep up with the calculations. We're detecting memory overflow events in 17 star systems now. Billions of minds are experiencing random knowledge insertions. Marcus barely looked up from his work. For the past 18 hours, he had been deep in mathematical conversation with the Sauroch, learning to think in their equation-based language. His understanding had progressed from simple prime number exchanges to complex multidimensional calculations that described relationships between space, time, and consciousness itself. "I think I understand the core problem," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion but filled with excitement. "The Sauroch don't just store memories. They exist in a state of quantum entanglement with the consciousness of every being whose memories they preserve. When someone dies, their consciousness doesn't disappear, it becomes part of the Sauroch network." Prime Hunter Vorthak leaned closer, his massive form casting shadows over the equations floating around Marcus. "Are you saying the Sauroch are connected to the spirits of the dead?" "Not spirits, quantum consciousness signatures. Every thinking being leaves a unique pattern of quantum fluctuations when they die. The Sauroch have evolved the ability to maintain quantum entanglement with these signatures, essentially keeping a piece of every consciousness they've encountered in a stable, accessible state." Dr. Koss's crystalline form flickered with amazement. "That's impossible. Quantum entanglement breaks down across large distances, and maintaining it with billions of consciousness signatures would require energy outputs greater than entire star systems." Marcus gestured to the Sauroch around him, whose scales were now displaying equations that made the quantum computers work at maximum capacity just to translate them. "Unless you're not maintaining the entanglement through normal space. Look at these calculations. They're showing me that the Sauroch network exists partially outside our dimension. They're using higher dimensional mathematics to maintain stable connections across galactic distances." The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. The Sauroch weren't just living libraries, they were conscious beings maintaining active connections to the quantum consciousness of every individual who had ever shared memories with them. They were, in essence, keeping billions of souls alive in a vast, interconnected network that spanned space and time. "The energy readings from the Nexus territories," Marcus continued, pieces falling into place rapidly. "Something there is interfering with their ability to maintain these higher dimensional connections. The consciousness signatures are becoming unstable, bleeding out into normal space-time and affecting anyone with sufficient quantum sensitivity." Laura Keeper Theron, who had been silent until now, spoke with a voice heavy with ancient knowledge. "There is something we have not told you, young human. The Nexus territories are not empty space. They are the location of the first Sauroch consciousness merger, the place where our species first learned to connect with their quantum networks over 3 million years ago." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "What's in the Nexus territories?" "The first network," Theron replied. "The original consciousness collective that taught the Sauroch how to preserve and share memories across species. It has been dormant for millennia, but if something has awakened it—" The largest Sauroch in the circle suddenly blazed with brilliant white light, its scales displaying equations so complex that several of the quantum computers overloaded trying to process them. Marcus watched in fascination and terror as the mathematical patterns revealed the truth. "It's not just awakening," Marcus whispered. "It's dying. The first network has been maintaining the fundamental mathematical structure that allows all Sauroch consciousness networks to function. Something is causing it to collapse, and when it fails completely, every Sauroch in the galaxy will lose their connection to the preserved consciousness signatures." "How long?" asked Vorthak. Marcus's hands flew over his control interface, working through calculations with the Sauroch that spanned multiple dimensions of space-time. According to their mathematics, we have approximately 14 hours before total network collapse. When that happens, billions of consciousness signatures will be released into normal space-time simultaneously. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone contemplated what that would mean. Every planet with quantum-sensitive species would be flooded with random memories, knowledge, and personality fragments from countless dead civilizations. The psychological impact would drive billions of beings insane, while the loss of accumulated knowledge would set back galactic civilization by millennia. "Can we prevent it?" Dr. Koss asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned to the Sauroch circle, his mind working on levels he hadn't known were possible. The mathematical conversation that followed was unlike anything any being present had ever witnessed. The air itself seemed to thicken with quantum calculations as Marcus and the Sauroch worked together to explore possible solutions. "There's a way," Marcus finally said, his young face showing determination beyond his years. "But it requires something that's never been attempted before. We need to establish a new mathematical foundation for the Sauroch network, one that doesn't depend on the first network for stability." "How?" Vorthak demanded. Marcus stood up, walking to the center of the Sauroch circle. "We need to create a hybrid system. Human mathematical logic combined with Sauroch quantum consciousness manipulation. I need to become part of their network, not permanently, but long enough to help them restructure their entire consciousness storage system using mathematical principles that can exist independently." The room erupted in protests. Dr. Koss was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "That's suicide. Human consciousness isn't designed to interface with quantum networks of that complexity. Your mind would be torn apart by the data overflow." "Not if we do it right," Marcus replied calmly. "The Sauroch have been teaching me their mathematical language for days. I can think in their equation patterns now. And human consciousness has one advantage. We're really good at seeing new patterns and creating innovative solutions. That's exactly what they need." Prime Hunter Vorthak growled, a sound that vibrated through the floor plating. "I will not allow a child to sacrifice himself for our mistakes." Marcus looked up at the massive Kathrani warrior, his brown eyes bright with determination. "This isn't sacrifice. This is what I was meant to do. Why do you think a human child could learn their mathematical language when the greatest minds in the galaxy couldn't? This isn't coincidence. Somehow, my brain developed in a way that makes this possible." Before anyone could stop him, Marcus sat down in the exact center of the Sauroch circle and placed his hands flat on the floor. "I need you all to maintain the calculation streams we've been working on. When I establish the connection, feed me the consciousness network data gradually. Don't overwhelm me all at once." The Sauroch around him began to glow with soft, synchronized light. Their scales displayed the most complex mathematical equations anyone present had ever seen. Formulas that described the relationship between consciousness, quantum mechanics, and higher dimensional mathematics. Marcus felt the connection establish itself gradually. At first, it was like having a gentle conversation with vast alien minds. Then, as the data flow increased, it became something else entirely. He could feel the presence of billions of consciousness signatures, scientists from extinct civilizations, artists whose species had died out eons ago, philosophers who had contemplated questions that wouldn't be asked by living beings for millions of years. The knowledge was overwhelming, but Marcus found that his human mind could process it differently than the Sauroch. Where they experienced it as a vast network of interconnected memories, he could see it as mathematical relationships, as patterns that could be reorganized and stabilized using principles that combined the best of both human and Sauroch thinking. "I can see the problem," Marcus said. though his voice sounded strange, like multiple people speaking in harmony. The original mathematical framework was designed for a single species network. As more species were added over millions of years, the complexity increased beyond the system's ability to maintain stability. We need to implement a distributed processing model. Working faster than should have been humanly possible, Marcus began restructuring the consciousness network using mathematical principles that drew from both human computer science and Sauroch quantum mechanics. He created virtual partitions that could handle different types of consciousness signatures, established redundant pathways that would prevent cascade failures, and implemented error correction protocols that would automatically stabilize any part of the network that began to destabilize. The work took every bit of his strength and intelligence, pushing his young mind to its absolute limits. But gradually he could feel the network stabilizing around the new mathematical framework he was creating. "It's working," Dr. Koss reported, her voice filled with amazement. "The consciousness overflow events are decreasing. The network is achieving stable configuration." Marcus maintained the connection for another 2 hours, fine-tuning the new system and ensuring that all the consciousness signatures were properly integrated into the stabilized network. When he finally broke the connection, he collapsed to the floor, completely exhausted but smiling. The Sauroch around him displayed the most beautiful pattern anyone had ever seen. Cascades of gold and silver that seemed to sing with mathematical harmony. It was their way of expressing gratitude in a language that transcended species barriers. "The network is stable," Marcus whispered as his mother helped him sit up. "The consciousness signatures are secure and the Sauroch can maintain their memory preservation functions indefinitely using the new mathematical framework." Prime Hunter Vorthak knelt beside Marcus, his massive form somehow gentle as he spoke. "What you have done today will be remembered for as long as consciousness exists in this galaxy. You have saved not just the Sauroch, but the preserved wisdom of countless civilizations." Marcus looked around the room at the assembled beings who had initially dismissed him as too small and too young to contribute anything meaningful. Now they were looking at him with expressions of awe, gratitude, and respect. "I couldn't have done it without the Sauroch," Marcus said softly. "They taught me to think in ways I never imagined possible. This wasn't about human superiority or alien inferiority. It was about different types of minds working together to solve a problem that neither could handle alone." The Sauroch in the circle began moving toward Marcus, not in their usual predatory grace, but with a gentleness that surprised everyone present. One by one, they approached him and briefly touched their scaled heads to his hands, a gesture that Dr. Koss's sensors indicated was transferring small amounts of quantum data. "They're giving you something," she reported, her crystalline form flickering with curiosity. Marcus felt the gentle touches and suddenly understood. "They're sharing memories with me. Not consciousness signatures from their network, but their own personal memories. They want me to understand what I've helped preserve." The experiences that flowed into Marcus's mind were unlike anything he could have imagined. He saw the first meeting between a Kathrani hunter and a Sauroch thousands of years ago, felt the wonder and terror as two completely different forms of consciousness learned to trust each other. He experienced memories from beings whose species had died out before Earth's sun was born, witnessed the last moments of civilizations that had achieved wonders beyond current galactic technology. But more than individual memories, he felt the vast network of connections that linked every preserved consciousness. Scientists from different eras and species collaborating on problems across the boundaries of death itself. Artists sharing inspiration across millions of years. Philosophers debating questions that span the entire history of intelligent thought in the galaxy. "This is incredible," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. "They're not just preserving memories. They're maintaining active collaboration between the greatest minds that have ever lived. Dead civilizations are still contributing to galactic knowledge through the network. Lore Keeper Theron's voice was filled with pride and satisfaction. Now you understand why the Sauroch are so precious to us. They are the bridge between the living and the dead, between the wisdom of the past and the challenges of the future. As the memory sharing completed, Marcus felt a profound sense of connection to the galaxy and its history that he had never experienced before. He was no longer just a human child who happened to be good with mathematics. He was a living link between human ingenuity and the vast accumulated wisdom of countless species. The chamber's communication system suddenly activated, bringing reports from across the galaxy. The consciousness overflow events had stopped completely. Survey ships in the Nexus territories reported that the mysterious energy readings were stabilizing into patterns that actually enhanced their instruments' capabilities rather than disrupting them. Most importantly, Sauroch communities throughout the galaxy were showing renewed health and vitality. "The network isn't just stable," reported an excited technician from the monitoring station. "It's actually more efficient than it was before. The new mathematical framework is allowing the Sauroch to process and share information faster and more accurately than ever before." Prime Hunter Vorthak stood to his full impressive height and addressed the assembled delegates who had gathered to witness the conclusion of the crisis. "The debt we owe to the humans, and to young Marcus specifically, cannot be measured. He has not only saved the Sauroch and preserved the knowledge of countless civilizations, but he has improved upon systems that we thought were already perfect." The Zephyrian ambassador, who had been among Marcus's most vocal critics, stepped forward. His crystalline form was flickering with patterns that Marcus now recognized as deep embarrassment and newfound respect. "We owe you an apology, young human. We judged you by your size and age rather than your capabilities. You have taught us that wisdom and ability do not always come in the packages we expect." Marcus stood up, still shaky from his exhausting work, but grinning with the joy of success. "The important thing isn't who solved the problem. It's that we solved it together. The Sauroch's mathematical language, Kathrani determination, quantum architect processing power, and human pattern recognition all contributed to the solution. No single species could have done this alone." Dr. Koss approached Marcus, her form stabilizing into a configuration he had learned indicated deep respect. "What will you do now, young human? You have accomplished something that will be studied and celebrated for millennia. The galaxy's finest institutions would be honored to continue your education." Marcus looked around the chamber at the various species assembled, then at the Sauroch, who were still displaying their beautiful patterns of mathematical gratitude. "I want to learn more, not just about mathematics or linguistics, but about how different types of minds can work together to solve problems. There are probably other challenges out there that will need the same kind of cooperation we achieved here." "Indeed there are," agreed Prime Hunter Vorthak, "and the Kathrani would be honored to support your continued education and development. You have proven that the greatest achievements come not from individual brilliance, but from the ability to bridge differences and find common ground." As the formal proceedings concluded and the various delegates began making preparations to return to their home worlds, Marcus found himself sitting with his mother Sarah, both of them trying to process everything that had happened. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, studying her son's face with motherly concern. "You look different somehow." Marcus considered the question seriously. He did feel different, not just from the exhaustion, but from the profound experience of connecting with minds that thought in ways completely alien to human consciousness. "I think I understand now why this happened to me, Mom. It wasn't random that a human child could learn the Sauroch mathematical language. I think this is what humans might be really good at in the galactic community." "What do you mean?" "We're pattern recognizers and problem solvers. We see connections that other species miss because we think differently than they do. The Sorok are brilliant at maintaining and processing vast amounts of information, but they got stuck thinking about their network in the same way they always had. The Kathrani are incredible warriors and loyal friends, but they approach problems through strength and determination. The quantum architects can process information at impossible speeds, but they were looking for technological solutions. Marcus gestured toward the Sorok, who were now preparing for transport back to their home worlds. Humans, we're good at stepping back, seeing the big picture, and coming up with completely new approaches. We're bridge builders. That's our gift to the galaxy. Sarah smiled, her pride in her son evident despite her exhaustion. And what do you want to do with that gift? I want to learn everything I can about how different species think and solve problems. Then I want to find other challenges where that kind of bridge building is needed. Marcus paused, watching as the last of the Sorok prepared to leave. There's so much we can accomplish if we just learn to work together properly. Prime Hunter Vorthak approached them one final time before departing. Young Marcus, you will always have friends among the Kathrani. More than friends, you are now considered part of our extended family. If you ever need anything, you have but to ask. The massive warrior paused, then added with something that might have been humor. And perhaps next time, the galaxy will be wise enough to listen to small humans before dismissing them. As the command center was gradually dismantled and the various species departed for their homeworlds, Marcus stood looking out at the stars through the station's massive viewports. The galaxy looked the same as it had a week ago, but he now knew it was fundamentally different. Billions of consciousness signatures were safely preserved in a stabilized network that would continue to share wisdom across species and time. More importantly, the galaxy had learned something new about the value of cooperation between different types of minds. The combination of human ingenuity, Sorok mathematical consciousness, and the support of various allied species had achieved something that no single group could have accomplished alone. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, joining him at the viewport. Marcus smiled, his young face bright with possibilities for the future. "I'm thinking about all the problems out there that we don't even know about yet. Problems that are waiting for the right combination of different minds working together to solve them." He paused, watching ships from dozens of species departing for their homeworlds. "And I'm thinking that maybe being small in a big galaxy isn't such a bad thing after all. Sometimes the smallest key opens the biggest doors." The stars continued their ancient dance outside the viewport, but now Marcus knew they were connected by more than just gravity and light. They were connected by the preserved wisdom of countless civilizations, maintained by living mathematical poetry, and protected by the willingness of different species to see beyond their prejudices and work together toward common goals. The tiny human prodigy had become something more. He had become proof that in a galaxy full of wonders, the greatest wonder of all was what different minds could accomplish when they learned to truly understand each other.